Good afternoon, and welcome to TCC's Black History Month event. I am your host for this event, Jennifer Rouse. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at the Virginia Beach campus, and we're very excited to welcome with us today Kenyette Tisha Barnes. In just a moment, Ms. Barnes will be introduced by Dr. Campbell, Vice President of Student Affairs. And before we get to that welcome, we do just want to have a moment to recognize that some of the content that you may hear as part of the presentation may be challenging. We're going to delve into topics like human trafficking, and for some of us, we have varying experiences with those topics. And so we want you to be prepared for what might be uncomfortable for some or harder for others. So as we get into this conversation, I look forward to what we have to learn from our speaker, and Dr. Karen Campbell will now introduce her to us.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Karen Campbell, Vice President for Student Affairs at Tidewater Community College, and I have this wonderful opportunity to welcome you to this program. This program will engage, inspire, and provoke thought. Hampton Roads, with its significant military presence, tourism, and easy access to major highways, unfortunately serves as a hub for human trafficking. Virginia rates among the top states for human trafficking cases and victims. At Tidewater Community College, we have partnered with organizations like FreeKind to provide education and training for students, staff, and faculty. On January 14th, we showed our collective commitment by wearing blue for Anti-Human Trafficking Day. This event underscores our dedication to raising awareness and supporting those in need. Today, we are honored to host a program that sheds light on this important issue. As we proceed with today's program, I encourage you to listen actively and to ask questions. Together, we can make a difference in the fight against human trafficking. Thank you for being a part of this important conversation. Our next speaker will introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Kenyette Tisha Barnes.
Thank you, Professor Rouse. Our speaker today is a political strategist, lobbyist, public speaker, trainer, mother, and CEO of Naya Vision, an LLC, a social justice, consulting, and political strategy lobbying firm. And she is the national co-founder of #NewRKelly. Known as the Legislative Empress and best known for her work in the Georgia General Assembly, her legislative work includes lobbying for HIV advocacy, anti-human trafficking, domestic violence, postpartum depression, special education, and voter rights. She has served as an expert on sexual violence issues and has been featured on news outlets such as BBC, CNN, The New York Times, The Washington Post, NPR, The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, HLN, ABC, NBC, CBS, and so many others. I'm excited to introduce you today to Ms. Kenyette Tisha Barnes.
Hi, how are you? First of all, I am just so honored to be back in Hampton Roads. So I lived in Hampton Roads for about 5 years and absolutely love the work that's going on with Tidewater Community College and some other academic institutions around human trafficking. So as you guys have heard, human trafficking is not only an issue that affects our world, it affects our communities. And what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the different types of human trafficking. We're going to talk about ways that you might see human trafficking in your everyday life, some responses that are happening both domestically and internationally. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my emerging work around human trafficking, some new emerging types of trafficking, and then I am waiting to take your questions. So number one, I want to first of all give this disclaimer again. Subjects such as human trafficking and human slavery are extremely sensitive for a lot of reasons. Because as human beings, we are programmed to view our world as nice people, just people who only want to do the right thing. But unfortunately, there are nefarious players among us. And those nefarious players will do horrible things to the most vulnerable population. And so part of our work as the good people is to call out those bad behaviors, to identify those bad behaviors, and maybe look at some interventions that were not as successful. And then we're going to keep going and making sure that we eradicate it. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is, what is human trafficking? Human trafficking has a whole lot of definitions, but the predominant definition is, it is forced servitude. It is forced servitude against someone's will for the benefit of another. So types of trafficking that you might hear: labor trafficking, sex trafficking, organ trafficking, which I want to talk a little bit more about. And then something that's really becoming emergent, and that's reproductive trafficking. And we're going to talk about that as we get closer to the end of our presentation. So what I want to first of all talk about is labor trafficking. What is labor trafficking? So labor trafficking comes in many forms. And usually when we see labor violations, because we do have laws against labor violations, you have to work a certain amount of hours, you need a break for a certain amount of hours, and there's a certain amount of money you need to be paid. And of course, people will deviate from that, and they'll try to skirt the law and go to at-will work states and things of that nature. I do believe that Virginia is still an at-will work state. And a lot of people will state that, well, hey, isn't that trafficking? No, it's not. It is not trafficking. So I'm going to give you an example of what trafficking would look like. Trafficking would look like this. I am a migrant from Somalia, okay? And I am here with my family, and I'm looking for work, okay? I haven't broken any laws. I'm just here. I have a visa with a very small window, and I'm looking to just find a job so that I can extend my visa and possibly stay longer, okay? So here's something that would happen. I would meet someone called a broker. That broker might actually be someone who looks like me. She might be Black, she might be African, she might even be East African. She might be someone who looks like me. And she'll say, oh my God, I know the perfect family for you. You can come, they have a big house. You can even bring your kids with you. And you guys can stay in this nice little farmhouse. It's so super cute. And, you just have to do some domestic stuff. You can, clean up and do the dishes and cook. And, and your kids can even go to the school, because now they can sponsor you. Okay, I'm going to make statements throughout this presentation that I really want you to think about, because as we come back, you'll see how it's so innocuous, but it's very nefarious. Okay, so a lot of labor trafficking happens through a sponsor. So there's someone who's going to promise you the sun, the moon, and the stars. So me and my kids show up. Okay, we are able to get a teeny little visa. We kind of go through London and then come here. Okay, so we got our teeny little visa, and now we're here because, once again, you guys have an international airport. International airport, hubs of international airports are always high risk for international labor trafficking. So remember that, okay? I'm not talking about the Newport News airport. I'm talking about the Norfolk airport. I'm also talking about Dulles. I'm talking about Richmond. So you have to think in terms of your geography. What is around you that could possibly be used as a way to get to you? Another way that we're now seeing, cruise ships. And I'll get to that later down the line. Okay, so I'm back, smiling mom, my two kids, and now we get there. And someone shows up, and it's not the person I'm talking to. Oh, yeah, I know you were talking to Amy, but I'm Amy's cousin. And yeah, I know exactly where you're going. Okay, remember, I have very limited English literacy. I've trusted this person. Remember, traffickers build trust. We often hear these stories of people driving around neighborhoods in white vans and throwing people into their trucks. That's absolutely, it happens, but that's not how trafficking happens. Okay, so let's kind of, get real about what we're going to see. So now my children and I are getting into a car with someone we do not know. And we're driving to his house out in Isle of Wight. I don't even know where we're going now, right? And so we get there. And usually at this point, there'll be an exchange of money to the actual transporter. So we have a broker, we have a transporter. So now you're in the house. And now you're told, okay, your children's room is down there in the basement. Your room is up here. And it's like, well, why do my children have to be separated from me? And now your first night there, everyone's nice to you. You wake up, you're woken at 5 a.m. and now you have to clean the entire house, or there's going to be consequences. And very quickly, once that kind of buyer situation is over, first of all, you never see the woman again. Remember the first woman that said, you never see her again. She's gone. She's off manipulating another family. And now you're there with your children and you're vulnerable. And then you're going to start hearing, well, we paid for you and your children's airfare. We paid for your passports and visas. You got to give us that money back. So now you're in debt bondage. More vocabulary. Debt bondage. Debt bondage is a way that people who are victims of labor trafficking usually find themselves trapped. Okay? It's like, yeah, I know this is horrible. Your kids are living in the basement. They can't go to school. And they'll make up things. Well, yeah, we called Mogadishu and someone said you were wanted for smuggling and you were wanted for wire fraud. Your kids can't go to school here. It's against the law for you to send your kids to school with that kind of crime on you. Once again, it's a lie, correct? And now you're stuck. It is estimated that families who are trafficked into domestic labor stay there for 5 years. And usually what happens is that a neighbor or another outside person starts to get wind that something is wrong. Or, unfortunately, someone is seriously injured, hurt, or killed. And now you have brought in other organizations, you've brought in the police, you've brought in all kinds, and that's how people find out. So that's one way that labor trafficking can happen. The other thing that often happens in labor trafficking is a fear of deportation. Because once again, remember, this mother is here with her children and her visa was only for 30 days. And she was supposed to get it extended to 90 days with this new job, and then extended it and extended and extended, but that's over. Because no one is trying to get you what's called an F1 visa. Because the moment you and your children walk in, they're taking your passports. So they're taking your identification. You don't have citizenship, residency, or a visa to be here. You don't know anyone, and you have limited language literacy, and you don't have money. And let's talk about the money part, because that's the other thing. So I was promised $100 a week. Okay. That's great. Me and my kids can get a new life, right? No. Your bondage is $105 a week. So not only am I keeping your money, you now owe me $5. So how are you going to pay me? Because you can't leave, you can't work, you can't do anything. So what would a young mother have that can be used as currency by someone who doesn't have really good intent? I'll let you guys use your imagination on that one. A lot of people who are trafficked into domestic labor situations also report concurrent sex trafficking. And it's not just sex trafficking of the adult. It is often sex trafficking of the children as well. Because remember, the kids are still here, but they're in the basement. And you have no idea what's happening to them in the basement. Okay. We'll take a pause here. So I start out by telling you all, when we think about trafficking in the real world, it looks nothing like what we see on TV. Nothing. So a couple of things have to happen, and it's the same thing with labor, sex, and organ trafficking. And there is a broker. There is always a broker. Okay? Traffickers do not advertise themselves. I am a sex trafficker. I am. No, there's always a broker. And often the broker was formerly trafficked. I often hear when I do these presentations, how could someone lie like that? How could someone, because they're traumatized, because they're operating through a lens of PTSD, because they have Stockholm syndrome, because they are also afraid. They're afraid that if I don't get this mother, they're going to keep hurting me and my kids. And the other part that would happen after about a year of that mother and her children being in that house is the trafficker would say, go to the airport and go online and find another mom and her kids. And now you all can go. And the vicious cycle continues. So that's one way of labor traffic and domestic labor traffic. And another way of labor traffic, and I'm not going to kind of go through all these scenarios, but another way that we often see is kind of commercial labor trafficking. And these are people who will actually get the work visas for one person, but then they will have maybe 10 people living in a trailer, living in one room, and they're working 12 hours a day with no breaks, the same debt bondage type of situation. So when you're talking about labor trafficking, one, it is a gross violation of our labor laws and the labor laws in most developed countries. Number two, there is usually a broker involved, and this broker is recruiting people who are vulnerable and under false pretenses. Three, there's usually some sort of debt bondage involved with that. And the debt bondage, and the thing about debt bondage, because someone said, just pay the bond. I'm like, okay, if I tell you that first of all, if I'm a trafficker, I probably got something in the DSM that's just not clicking. Okay. So I'm already a psychopath, right? So if I tell you you owe me $100 and you give me 100, I'm going to say you owe me 101. If you give me 101, I'm going to say you owe me 108. Because it's not about paying your debt. It's not about leveling the scale. It is about control. It is about using you. It is about the brutality of vulnerable people. That's what human trafficking is. Okay. Let's take a beat. Does anyone have any questions before I kind of move on to some other types of trafficking? Anyone from the YouTube live? No. Okay, great. All right. So the other thing that I want to talk about as far as trafficking that we don't hear a lot about, especially in the United States, we hear it in the United States in terms of recipients, and that is organ trafficking. And one of the projects I'm working on in the Cayman Islands is doing a series of modules for emerging healthcare providers. So if you guys, Tidewater, want me to come back and do some work for your nursing students, I got you. And so one of the things that I'm doing with a couple of med schools in the Caribbean is I'm actually teaching residents and medical students based on their discipline how to view trafficking in their particular clinical subspecialties. So we're looking at emergency medicine, OBGYN, radiology, gastroenterology. Use your imagination for that one. And nephrology. The most trafficked organ are kidneys. Kidneys are the most trafficked organ, primarily because you don't need both of them. One good kidney could actually get you through, but kidneys also are the most sought after organ, other than hearts and cardiac parts. But so the most trafficked organ are kidneys. So when you're seeing organ trafficking, you're going to see usually the kidneys that are being taken. And one of the things that we see with organ trafficking, and this is more common in sub-Saharan African countries, is where you're seeing the organ trafficking happening the most, because you want young people, you want young vulnerable people, you want young healthy vulnerable people. Okay, because you want people who are healthy because you know their kidneys are working. You're not going to go find a 60-year-old who's been smoking all their life and say, I want your kidney. No, you're not. So people who are at risk for organ trafficking are people who are homeless, people who have a level of vagrancy, people who are economically insecure. So you're looking, once again, internationally, you're looking at countries in sub-Saharan Africa. You're looking at some countries in the Middle East. You're looking at some countries in Eastern Europe. Because when you talk about who's most vulnerable to organ trafficking, it's young, healthy people. Young, healthy people are the most vulnerable. So how does it work? Someone said, okay, so if I go to Benin and I get a kidney, how am I going to get that kidney back? Well, you're not. And we'll start there. You're just not. There's no way to get a kidney through customs. So what tends to happen is that traffickers are working with clinicians in that area. And people would actually fly to that area and get that surgery. So one of the things that is a red flag, especially for clinicians, are people who are having any kind of nephrology or kidney transplant surgery in a foreign country. That is a red flag. If you are a emerging doctor, nurse, phlebotomist, nephrology tech, especially you nephrology techs out there, because you're going to see this the most when you're doing dialysis. Two things you look at. Number one, where did they get that kidney? Where was the surgery? And people will tell you, oh, it's cheaper to go to Madagascar. Well, Madagascar wouldn't do it, but it's cheaper to go to another country, right? That's always a red flag for potential organ trafficking. How do people get recruited into organ trafficking? It's real simple. I'll give you $1,000 for your kidney. And if my family is living off $200 a month, $1,000 is going to get us through half the year. That's great. And oh, I don't really need the kidney, right? Because I got another one. Except you don't get paid. Because what happens is you're usually under anesthesia. And you show up somewhere, and before you know it, you wake up with a scar on your lower back or a scar on your side. And that's what people are looking at now. When you're going to the emergency departments, if you're seeing people with these crude scars, they'll usually tell you, oh, I got into a fight. Oh, it was something that happened. But if that kidney is missing, it might be organ trafficking. Do we have organ trafficking in the United States? Absolutely. We do. We don't talk about it because we also have an organ shortage in the United States. And unfortunately, we have a very positive mindset about organ donation in the United States, and there's nothing wrong with it. I know many people whose lives have been continued because of organ donation, but there is a procurement process that is legal. And that procurement process takes a lot of time, and people don't want to wait. Who is at risk for organ trafficking in the United States? People who are street level homeless. People who are street level homeless and young. So homeless teens are very much at risk for organ trafficking. People who are migrants, people who don't speak the language, they're at risk for organ trafficking in the United States. They're also at risk for brokered organ trafficking. Okay. Any questions about organ trafficking? Yes. We're okay. Yes, we're good. One question. Okay, go ahead.
So we do have one question from the chat. And the question is, what is the percentage of people in the US who are survivors of labor trafficking?
Ooh, it is high. It's high because it's difficult to quantify. What usually you see is misclassification. And a lot of people will hide behind misclassification penalties. Oh, I classified them as a consultant, but I really should have classified them as a worker. And they'll hide behind misclassification, but it's extremely high. And you're going to see it more in agricultural, domestic, and construction type of jobs. That's a great question. It's high enough that the U.S. Department of Labor is now looking at it a little with a bit more critical eye. Okay, thank you. That's a great question. All right, so next I want to move to sex trafficking. And when I want to talk about sex trafficking, and I want to once again give this trigger warning, okay? Sex trafficking, of all of my different types of trafficking, tends to be the one that is the most sensitive. So I want to be very mindful of that. But I also want to talk about it in a real way. And I want to begin to dispel the myths about what is sex trafficking and who are the players and blah, blah, blah. Once again, I'm going to start. The idea that that random girls walking from the bus stop, coming from school with their school bag and white vans snatching girls into, that is an urban myth. Street level abduction is extremely rare. When we think about it in terms of all types of abductions, random street level abduction is very rare. When most people are abducted, they're abducted by people they know. And the most common type of abduction, ironically, is children by a non-custodial parent. So I want to start there. You know, I know there was some stuff flying around the internet at one point, and for some reason, people keep tagging me in this stuff. You know, how do you stop people from tagging you and everything? I keep getting tagged. Okay, what about this? What about it? What about it? So let's talk about what is sex trafficking, and we're going to break it down in some subcategories. And then I have my last one, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing, and then I'm going to let you guys ask away. So first of all, sex trafficking is any type of forced sex work against the person's will. Either the person is too young to consent legally, the person is being forced under duress, or some type of threat, chemical incapacitation, or fear, or the person is an adult and it is still forced. In the United States, we have two types of sex trafficking. We have domestic minor sex trafficking, and we have just kind of regular sex trafficking, okay? And within regular sex trafficking, there's no such thing as regular sex trafficking. Adult, non-minor sex trafficking. In non-minor sex trafficking, you have different subcategories of that. Some of them are direct sex work. Some of them are dancing, strip clubs, pornography. That's either print, internet, OnlyFans girls, cam girls. And I actually spoke with someone from OnlyFans, so I want to be super clear about that. You know, OnlyFans is actually doing a lot of good work around cutting that down. Okay, so, and then you also have people who are doing escorting. Okay, so let's start with domestic minor sex trafficking. The average age of a domestic minor sex trafficking victim is 14. The average time that a domestic minor sex trafficking victim will be involved in trafficking is 2 to 3 years. So once a young person gets into trafficking and begins to get trafficked, they're probably not going to get out until they're an adult. Okay, so that's tough. All right, and that's real. And I know Free Kind has been, I'm familiar with their work, so they're really trying to let people know we got to take this seriously. Once a young teenager gets involved in trafficking, the risk is that that young person will be trafficked until they're an adult. Okay. 2, most kids who are trafficked, and we're talking about boys and girls, but the predominant gender is cis female. Okay, so girls who identify as cisgender are the highest population that are trafficked as teenagers. We also have boys, and we also have trans and non-binary kids who are trafficked as well. Okay. The other thing about children who are trafficked, teens who are trafficked, domestic minor sex trafficking, is that they will interact with some type of medical provider within the first 3 months. Again, for you all listening who are in clinical fields, phlebotomy, because the phlebotomists know everything. I don't know what you all are talking. The phlebotomists know everything. Nursing, CNAs, pre-med students. You're going to see trafficked kids within 3 months of being trafficked. And you're going to see them in a couple of spaces. You're going to see them in emergency medicine. They're going to come in with bruising. They're going to come in with broken bones. You're going to see them in OBGYN. They're going to come in either with STIs or pregnant or having attempted a termination. So you're going to see them there. You're going to see them in radiology. Once again, broken bones. You're going to see them. Ironically, I saw this in like, one of the things that I saw was neurology. You're going to see them in neurology. You're going to see, they're literal neurology and psychiatry together. You're going to see deep traumas. You're going to see physical traumas. You're going to see deep psychological traumas. You're going to see PTSD. You're going to see anxiety disorders. You're going to see depression. You're going to see this stuff. And one of the things that we have to start doing is recognizing who are the players. Who are the players? And then getting off the sideline and doing something. One of the things that I noticed in my work around sexual violence of teens, not just trafficking, is that I have never seen so many mandated reporters report not a damn thing. I'm like, wait a minute. What? But you all will gossip about it, right? This girl was 13 and pregnant. First of all, any child under the age of 14 who is pregnant, the likelihood that that father is an adult or a very older teen is extremely high. Any child under the age of 13 that is pregnant, they can't consent. And it should be looked at as abuse. So trafficked teens who are girls, you're going to see pregnancies, you're going to see abortions, you're going to see STIs. And you're going to see serious STIs that you don't really see in the adolescent population. Adolescent STIs are mostly bacterial. You're going to see chlamydia, gonorrhea. You guys are in Hampton Roads, so syphilis is there. You might definitely see syphilis. But if you're seeing HIV, herpes simplex 2, especially STIs that are more viral in nature, that is a red flag that something is going on and there's possibly forced sex. You're definitely going to see vaginal rectal trauma. That's going to be a telltale sign of sexual abuse. Okay. So domestic minor sex trafficking always gets everyone kind of up in arms. But because of the kid nature of it. But the reality is that as much as we try to stop this, this is all of our responsibility. And I want to take a beat and check in. Are we good? Okay. You got 2 questions. All right. I know I always get a question on this. Okay. I'm going to take a beat. I'm going to answer your questions. Go ahead, dear.
Okay, so 2 questions. The first, I got a text weeks ago from what seemed like a young teen. After telling her I didn't know her, she tried to befriend me even after I told her my age. I had told her I would report her. Was she being trafficked? How can I report this?
I'm assuming this is an adult man. It's possible that it wasn't trafficking. It's possible that it was phishing. It's possible that it was a scam. We have a lot of AI bots, and what they'll do is they will mine your social media and they will get these demographic information about you. And it's possible that he hit the demographics. If he doesn't know her, if she's not local, if this is a random text, it's possible that it was probably a phishing text. So I don't think that it was targeting him as a young person trying to seduce him. Young people, by the way, young people cannot seduce you. I'm sorry. There was a statement that there is no girl fast enough to catch a grown man who's not interested in girls. I digress. But for that young man, I would say to you, it's very possible that it's a bot message, because those bot messages come, I get bot messages and I'm like, no, I'm not interested in making any part of my body longer. So, you gotta, yeah, it's like they're bot messages. So I think that's probably a bot message. What I would suggest is probably changing your password and deleting the message and not responding to it. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's, if it was trafficking, what you would see is someone who would try to approach you in person, or someone who would try to approach you on a site. Like Snapchat or Instagram or something like that, then that's something that you should think of. But usually the girls are not the ones doing the broker. Remember, in the beginning, there's always a broker. Whenever you're dealing with any kind of trafficking, there's always a broker. Okay, so always keep that in the back of your mind, guys. If someone is coming to you individually and offering you services, they're probably not trafficked. That's probably someone who is actually a sex worker, because that does exist. But trafficking is always brokered. Any kind of trafficking, it's brokered. Okay. And your second question?
Thank you. Second question. What can people do to address the systems that incentivized forced labor? And what is happening in legislation to address human trafficking systems?
Okay. I like that question. Okay. So what can people do? It depends. And that was where I was going to go next, actually. So if that person wants to just hang tight, because I'm going to talk about the different systems. I'm going to talk about education, healthcare, criminal justice, juvenile justice, the legislature, and the judiciary. So I got it. I got it. Okay. So hang tight with that question. And as far as what's happening with legislation, my opinion of the legislation in the United States is that it's extremely lackluster. And I've actually spoken on panels about this and gotten people very upset. And I can talk a little bit about as kind of a separate conversation about, because I have it down here, like legislative, like what can we do? Because I really think that our response to trafficking in the United States, it's not effective. And it's actually looking at solutions through a criminal justice lens. And it's not looking at solutions through a preventative lens and a more holistic community lens. For instance, in the state of Georgia, for you to, they just enacted, they claim, stiffer penalties on pimps. Okay, great. But the person who is being trafficked has to testify. How does that work in the real world, right? Not only that, but we still have juvenile laws on our codes for prostitution. If people really want to get real about addressing underage domestic sex trafficking, we need to repeal all of those laws. And that is some work that I'm actually working on state by state by state. If you are serious about domestic minor sex trafficking prevention, why are we still adjudicating adolescents for prostitution and solicitation? Why? Why are we still adjudicating them? One, many of them can't consent, but we're still adjudicating them delinquent for engaging in sex work that could possibly be brokered and trafficking. So that's one of my what can we do questions. Okay. Yeah. And I'm going to talk more about that later in the presentation. So let's get back to the systems. My belief, and I made the comment that we have so many mandated reporters reporting nothing. In a lot of states, we have truancy laws that will automatically withdraw a student if they miss a certain amount of days. I forget how many days it is in Virginia. You guys probably know. I'm in Chicago, so in Illinois, I think it's 11 days. In different states, it's different days. So let's assume in state X, all right, it's 10 days. All right, we'll just take 10 as a round number. So if a child is missing from school for 10 days, it triggers a truancy investigation. And then it also withdraws that child from school. And what often happens is for a lot of children who are being trafficked or abused in any way, the school is literally their lifeline. That is the place where you have counselors and teachers and trusted adults who know you and care for you and who could advocate for you. But when we trump that with truancy laws and automatic withdrawal, we're literally taking that away from kids. We're taking it away from victims. Because what happens is, let's assume I do get away. Let's assume I am able to get away from my trafficker. I can't go back to school because now I have a withdrawal on my transcript. So what happens? I am now another dropout of no fault of my own. And I do know that Tidewater has some really good adult learning programs. So thank you, because you might be saving some of these young people who can't get back into school. So I think for public schools, we need to do better at identifying trafficking and preventing kids from being discharged from the school, because it's literally protective for a lot of kids. The other thing about schools is that we need to talk about it in terms of prevention and not in terms of the potential victim's behavior. So here's what I mean by that. Why are you walking around with those shorts on? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Short skirts have never trafficked anybody. Traffickers don't care how you dress. Newsflash, traffickers don't care how you dress. You can walk down the street in a puffer jacket and pigtails, carrying a Bible. And if a trafficker believes that you are vulnerable, isolated, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for vulnerability and isolation. So here is how trafficking really works. You see that girl sitting in the cafeteria by herself every day. And you notice that she doesn't have a whole lot of friends. And so now you might be a broker. You might have been trafficked and your trafficker finally said, I'll let you out if you get me another girl. So now she becomes your best friend. So as teachers and administrators, if you're starting to see new friendships and new interest in a student that is kind of introverted, red flag. Red flag. Hey, I noticed that you and Amy have been hanging out. What do you know about her? Do you like her? Is she nice to you? You start asking questions. Remember, traffickers like vulnerability and isolation. When people start digging in your business, they move. Because they're not really committed to you as a person. They're committed to your vulnerability and your isolation. Okay? So that is something that schools can do. The other thing schools can do is to stop with the self-esteem lectures. Stop with the self-esteem lectures, guys. This idea that you just need higher self-esteem and you don't have to worry about being trafficked. Excuse me? No, self-esteem won't protect you. What will protect us is identifying what trafficking looks like. Who are the players? And having a response when we see those vulnerable, isolated kids being targeted. Okay? The next thing, and another population that I find that the schools just really don't do well at protecting are teen parents. Teen parents are highly vulnerable to trafficking. They're highly vulnerable for many reasons. One, because they lack resources. I don't know how many of you have actually purchased baby diapers, but my kids were born in the early 2000s and they were expensive. I walked past some Pampers, just getting some other stuff, and I was blown away that they were like $35. I'm like, wait a minute, what? Like, are they new Pampers? So teen parents often lack resources. And because they lack resources, there's usually a stigma, well, there is a stigma attached to teen pregnancy. They tend to be more isolated. And, we have these social narratives that teen parents are damaged and teen parents have low morals. So, you throw in a little bit of social shaming and they're perfect victims for domestic minor sex trafficking. So the schools do better at providing safety for teen parents. That's what the schools could do. And I'm not going to get into comprehensive sex education and all of that stuff because that's not going to help you all. Look, I lobbied in Virginia. I know what you all are doing. But even with that, we have to get real about what trafficking looks like in a school setting. The next space I want to go to is I talked a little bit about medicine. I talked a little about the medical spaces. Instead of gossiping about the 13-year-old who came in after her third abortion, maybe start digging deeper. Okay? Nurses, front desk staff, you all are all mandated reporters. Start reporting. Juvenile justice. Until we get serious about how we handle sexual-based offenses in juvenile justice, I will never take any state seriously who says that they are about eradicating sex trafficking, including Virginia. Because as long as you have laws on your books that which adjudicate adolescents delinquent for prostitution and solicitation, you're not really serious about eradicating sex trafficking. Most teenagers who are involved in sex work, it's brokered. So that's my message to juvenile justice. For general law, for criminal law, making victims, underage victims, testify against their traffickers in exchange for immunity is brutal. It's brutal. You are brutalizing these young people and you are using the judiciary to do it. We need to do better at giving ex parte testimony. We need to do better at protecting victims. Asking an adolescent victim of trafficking to get on a stand in front of their trafficker, it is abusive. And I know that we have administrative laws about criminal defense and criminal justice, but we're talking about something different here. So I am a proponent of ex parte testimony. So ex parte testimony basically means that it's without a party. So basically it would be, an example would be, it would be the judge, it would be an advocate, it might be the prosecutor, and maybe the defense attorney. And the defendant isn't there. And you can ask the questions and you can get your testimony and it's under oath, but that victim should not be required to sit in a courtroom across from the person who brutalized them. So that's kind of what I'm working on. Someone asked, and last with the legislature, I did state that we need to get real and we need to get some evidence-based trafficking and prevention laws on our books. Okay. So now let's go to international sex trafficking. So international sex trafficking, and I talked about this a little bit in the green room. International sex trafficking, for the most part, is highly tied to civil unrest. So whenever you have periods of civil unrest, like Kosovo, Rwanda, it opens a door for nefarious players to come in. And one of the things that was happening in Ukraine, and I have some colleagues who know people in Romania. And one of the things that the Romanian anti-trafficking advocates were doing were standing at the border. So when people were when the traffickers were driving up and, hey, your cousin told me to come and get you. Hey, I have the trafficking prevention people were right there on the set. And they were like, they are a trafficker. They're going to take you and your kids. They're going to traffic you. They're going to hurt you. And it cleared the border. And then I think they went to Belarus and got people from Belarus. So that's what's happening in international spaces whenever you have unrest. Right now, we're seeing a migrant issue coming from our southern borders. Those people are highly vulnerable to labor trafficking, to organ trafficking, and to sex trafficking. So whenever you have any type of civil unrest, one big time, let me back up. When you have civil unrest, you are going to always have a heightened risk of any kind of trafficking, just because you have a large population of what? Vulnerable and isolated people. Remember, those are the two things that all traffickers need. They need you vulnerable and isolated. Because if you have agency, if you got people around you, they can't weasel in. They can't be your best friend when you actually have a best friend. Right? And one of the things that happened with trafficking, and we started to really see this, and this is when ICE got involved, is the fall of the former Soviet Union. So very often we'll see things and we'll think there's something that they're not. That we'll see things as benign that are not. And one of the things that we saw in the 90s, early 2000s, because Soviet Union went down in 91, was mail order brides. Mail order brides from Belarus, from Russia, from, pick a former Soviet state. And one of the things that happened was once those states fell, once the Soviet Union fell, those states were kind of destabilized. And it made a market of young, beautiful, vulnerable, and isolated women. And what did we do? We didn't say, oh, God, that's messed up. We were like, yes. How much does it cost? How much does it cost? I need me one of those. I need two of those. I'll get one from Russia and one from Ukraine. Yeah. And unfortunately, when we were talking about international trafficking, in addition to vulnerability and isolation, you also need buyers. And now I want to go to the buyers. But before I go to the buyers, I want to take a beat, see if there's any questions in the chat. No questions. Great. So I have one more type of trafficking I want to talk about, and then I want to get to buyers, because I think that's going to be where we really need to put a lot of our resources and energy. And when I tell you who the buyers are, you're going to be shocked. All right. So the last type of trafficking that's really becoming, it's kind of, it's emerging. And it's emerging because it hits against some other things. And the United Nations hasn't officially called it a form of trafficking. But I am going to introduce it so that when it officially becomes a form of trafficking, you all know. And that is called reproductive trafficking. Reproductive trafficking is what it sounds like: forced reproduction. Many of you probably know that we don't have a lot of infants for people who are looking to adopt babies for a lot of reasons. Okay. And this isn't an attack against anyone who builds their family through adoption. I know some beautiful people and beautiful families built through adoption. Okay. However, what happens with reproductive trafficking is that you're forcing young women to get pregnant. The best way that I describe this is almost like a puppy mill. And that is so dehumanizing, and I apologize, but let me explain to you what it looks like. It looks like a house with 4 or 5 bedrooms and 4 or 5 or maybe 10 or 12 girls, and they're all pregnant. They're all pregnant. Sometimes it's through artificial insemination. Sometimes it's through forced sex. Once again, the connection between sex work, the intersection between sex work and other types. But these girls are pregnant. Okay, thank you. The girls become pregnant. Okay. And then you have people who will make a website and, oh, we have all these beautiful, beautiful babies. And then these babies are delivered, born, and immediately are given to an adoptive family. And the way adoption policies work is very iffy in different states and in different countries. But in no country is that acceptable. So we are still trying to see how many of the girls were pregnant and then went to the houses, or how many of the girls became pregnant and were put in the house. So that's where we are right now. But once again, I know there's some borders that have closed their adoption to Americans because of these nefarious practices. But that is what I have right now. I got 5 minutes. Who are buyers? Buyers are everybody. Buyers are everybody. If you have ever hired someone to do work in your house and paint your house, and you haven't seen their credentials, and you are working with a broker and this person shows up and he speaks no English, you might be dealing with trafficking. If you've ever asked someone to come and clean your house and you don't know who they are or where they come from, but you've spoken to someone about them, you're probably using labor trafficking. If you are a young man and you've gone to a bachelor party and all of a sudden these beautiful girls just show up and they don't speak English and they're all speaking Portuguese or Russia or whatever, but they're like loving you and only thing they know how to say is love me long time, they're probably being trafficked. So sometimes when you've gone to a strip club, they're probably being trafficked. The beautiful thing is that people who are in sex work industries, legitimate sex work industries, are really helping to cut down on trafficking in those spaces. There are strip clubs in Atlanta that will literally call the police if they suspect that a girl is being trafficked. And that's, in my opinion, how we're going to stop it. So that is my time. As you all know, I could go on and on and on and on and on, but I am beyond honored to have been here. That is just a primer of the work that I do. Definitely would love to come back and talk to some of your medical professions, your clinical professions. But if there's any questions, I am here. I think we're at time, but I'm gonna stop talking. Thank you.
So all I can think about, the only things that are coming to my mind right now are hard truths and hiding in plain sight.
Yep.
That you had us rethink the assumptions that we have about trafficking and what it looks like and where it happens. And we need to revisit those assumptions and revisit these practices in our institutions that aren't helpful. So thank you for the work that you're doing to bring visibility, to challenge the ways we've normalized behaviors. I think about some of when you were talking about mail order brides, and I remember growing up and that was just in the culture and we kind of laughed about it. It was something. And it's when we normalize these, as you say, nefarious practices, it allows it to continue and it allows it to perpetuate. I know I would like for the audience to be aware of resources. So I'm aware of the humantraffickinghotline.org. So
Yep.
for anyone who wants more information, humantraffickinghotline.org. But do you have, can you share, do you have social media or a website or any information that you can share with the viewers?
Well, I will share my social media handles, and I can give them to you. I think the Polaris Project is another one that is really good. But for me, if you're really interested in learning about trafficking on a macro level, the United Nations has some wonderful resources, and so does the World Health Organization. They have wonderful, wonderful resources. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. So that takes us to our time. I want to thank the Student Life group for organizing this Black History Month event. And I want to thank you, Ms. Kenyette, Tisha Barnes, for returning back to Hampton Roads.
Right.
So making your way back to the 757
Absolutely.
with the work that you're doing in Chicago and really internationally. So we applaud your work and thank you for the offer to work with our students. I'm sure someone will be reaching out to you about it.
Okay, I will be, the phone will be open.
Okay. Okay. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for the next event.